So I want to welcome everyone to this opening session of the 2024 Maynard Adams Symposium for the Humanities. I'm Lloyd Kramer, and I'm a professor of history and director of Carolina Public Humanities, and I want to thank all of you for joining us today. We have a good group here in the Keynote Center, but we also have a large number of people on the Zoom. I don't know exactly how many, but I don't know, maybe as many on the Zoom as we have in the room. So all of you who are on Zoom land, I want to thank you for being part of this program. You're part of the symposium, which carries the overall title of Building Democracies in Times of Populism and Polarization. And as you know, debates about the nature of democracy and the role of public participation in government institutions goes all the way back to ancient times. But this debate has gained greater urgency over the last couple of centuries since the time of the American Revolution and the French Revolution, and it's certainly an issue in our own time. In part because we can see authoritarian movements rising all over the world. And the question is arising, are we repeating a drift toward authoritarianism that has been characteristic of other periods in human history? Some historians think we are facing a crisis somewhat similar to the crisis of the 1930s when democratic systems collapsed in places like Germany or Italy or in other parts of Europe. And so this raises the question, how do we defend democracy? Is democracy important for us to defend? And people have often said that democracies don't work very well. They've condemned democracies as inefficient or as unable to solve problems. So, in this period of crisis, we're clearly facing a crisis right now in many parts of the world. The question is, why has this crisis developed? And what can be done to respond to this crisis without drifting into dangerous forms of populism or elitist-centered technocracies? And how can the perspectives of humanities-based knowledge, philosophy, history, how can these traditions help us address the crisis in democracy? These are the questions that have shaped the themes of this year's Maynard Adams Symposium. This is the 7th annual Maynard Adams Symposium that Carolina Public Humanities has organized. And these symposia honor the longtime UNC philosopher Maynard Adams, who was the founder and early advocate of what was then called the Program in the Humanities and Human Values. This program was established in 1979, and we changed our name in 2017 to become the Carolina Public Humanities to more clearly explain our mission and our goals. And like many projects and departments in the university, our goal is to be of the public and for the public. And so we now serve thousands of lifelong learners, of teachers, people in community colleges, people in communities far beyond Chapel Hill. And I particularly want to stress the importance of our Carolina K-12 program, which has served teachers for many years and has been led for more than 10 years by Christy Norris. Christy, would you, there she is. Christy is literally on her way out the door because, as many of you know, she has been named the new Deputy Secretary for Public Education in the North Carolina Department of Natural and Cultural Resources. So after many years, this is Christy's last event at Carolina Public Humanities. Would you please wave to the crowd of admirers? Nobody has done more for the teachers of North Carolina than Christy. And she understands how our mission is to foster humanistic and humanities-centered conversations, and above all, to serve the people of North Carolina. And Christy has done that beautifully. We've also recently launched the Zetlow Civic Engagement Project, which brings UNC undergraduates into a public-facing project in which they learn more about how to be engaged in public life, how to advocate for the importance of voting, and how to build public participation in public institutions. And you can read in your program, I hope you all have this narrative about Maynard Adams to see how Professor Adams was a great advocate for the role of public education and public engagement with the humanities. He was the one who had the vision for Carolina public humanities. And this year's symposium expands on Professor Adams's ideas as we explore why and how democracies have evolved in the recent past and how we can protect them in the future. And we're very pleased this year to welcome Professor Cristina Lafont, who has come to us from Northwestern. I'll say a bit more about her in a minute, but she focuses on how to enhance public participation in democratic institutions. But this is not just an abstract philosophical issue. I would like to ask you to raise your hand if you think participation in democratic institutions is at a crisis point in the United States. Do you think the United States is facing a crisis in its democracy? Raise your hand. Oh my gosh. I guess you're a self-selected group. So, do you believe that democracy is an important part of America's history? Raise your hand for that. Okay, so there's the tension. You see a crisis, you think it's important. So you can see why we have chosen this subject and why it's timely and important. I want to begin by thanking the Taylor Charitable Trust and Crawford Taylor, who helped to support this event. I believe he's watching with his family from Birmingham, Alabama. The Charitable Trust, the Taylor Charitable Trust, has also created the Maynard Adams Fellowships for the Public Humanities to support graduate students who want to engage the public. And here they are, ladies and gentlemen. Would you please stand up if you are an Adams Fellow this year? Please rise. This is the future of the public humanities, ladies and gentlemen. This is where we're going. Thank you. You may be seated. We're so happy that you're here. Please have a seat. There's a seat right here. You see, everything comes together for the public humanities, sooner or later. So I also want to note that in addition to the Taylor Charitable Trust, we received support from the College of Arts and Sciences, and our Senior Associate Dean, Elizabeth Engelhardt, I believe is here. Thank you. I also want to thank the Philosophy Department. I believe the chair of the, Matt Kotzen in the back. The Philosophy Department is here. The community is coming together. I also want to thank all of the CPH staff who make this event possible. I've noted before Christy Norris, who is still at the doorway. But we also have Joanna Flynn, who is here. Joanna is outside. Beth Gardner, who is facilitating all this. Michaela Sinclair, who's at the front door. Kylie Seltzer, Brian Insminger, and Paul Bonici, who is managing the tech. So thank you all of this team. We're also joined by our board leader, Sarah Gear. I believe Sarah's here. Thank you. Our advisory board leader. And I should also note that this is the last year in which I will be at an Adams Symposium as the director of Carolina Public Humanities, because like Christy, I am on my way out the door. But I am not leaving. I'm just moving on. It's been my great honor to be the director of Carolina Public Humanities for 10 years. But our incoming director, Vicki Rovine, is here. Vicki, would you wave your hand? She is a professor art history, works on African art history. She's been the director of the African Studies Center. And I am so pleased that you are going to lead CPH into the future. You see what a wonderful community we have here. So thank you for being here. And now, just at this moment, I want to introduce another important member of our CPH community, UNC's Interim Chancellor Lee Roberts. I should note that our former UNC chancellors, Carol Folt and Kevin Guskowitz, have greeted the participants in the Adams Symposium during each of the previous 6 years. So we're therefore honored and pleased to continue this tradition with Chancellor Roberts. Although he only entered the Chancellor's office in January, it's probably hard to imagine that it was only in January, he has been at so many UNC events. I think I've seen you at lots of, he just keeps going. He's like the Energizer Bunny. I know you're more than that. I don't mean to, that's not a proper way to introduce the Chancellor, but he really rocks, you know, he keeps moving. I want to note that he came to another CPH event earlier in the year to advocate for the importance of the humanities. He is an ally in advocating for the importance of our programs, Carolina Public Humanities, and the importance of the humanities. He is also a chancellor who comes from a family of political leaders and journalists, so he understands the complexities and importance of democracy and democratic institutions. So I'm very pleased now to introduce Chancellor Lee Roberts, who will offer his comments about this event. And thank you so much for getting here. It's never easy to get here. You can use this microphone right here.
Lloyd, I appreciate it, and thank you very much for having me. I'm sorry to be running late. Some of you know that my mother was a professional broadcaster, and the trick at family events was always to speak before her, because nobody wanted to be speaking after her, given her competence. I feel that way a little bit coming after Lloyd. Wish I'd spoken before him, but that's what I get for getting here late. Good evening. Welcome to the annual Maynard Adams Symposium, which honors the legacy of a former chair of the philosophy department and faculty leader, E. Maynard Adams. His dream of a public humanities program was launched over 40 years ago, and we are seeing the result of his work and legacy every day here at Carolina. The symposium emphasizes the importance of the humanities for understanding and analyzing public issues and current debates. It's through the humanities that we understand ourselves and the world around us. The humanities give us essential knowledge and perspectives as we carry out our mission of service to the people of North Carolina and beyond. We're here today because of the dedicated work of many, and I want to thank a few of them now. Crawford Taylor and his family support this annual event and the graduate program that is associated with it, the Maynard Adams Fellows for the Public Humanities. To the Taylor family, thank you for your faithful support. And I want to thank the whole team at Carolina Public Humanities for their work. And thanks also to the Maynard Adams Fellows. We're honored to have Cristina Lafont, renowned author and the Harold H. and Virginia Anderson Professor of Philosophy at Northwestern University, as our keynote speaker. Her research and perspective on sustainable civic life and democracy in contemporary political cultures is critical for today's world. And finally, I want to thank you, Dr. Kramer, for your service to Carolina and your dedication to the humanities. I'll now turn it, indeed. I'll now turn it back over to Dr. Kramer, who will introduce our speaker. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you for coming. I know you have a very busy schedule and you need to go on also to another event.
Thank you.
So thank you. This is an affirmation. He has made a great effort to be here, and I know he has to go to yet another event. Shout out.
to the PPE program.
Okay. So I also want to thank the Program for Philosophy, Politics, and Economics, PPE. The director, Jeff Sayre McCourt, one of the directors, is here, one of the leaders. And they are also helping us sponsor and promote this event. So thank you. Okay, so finally, let's move to the highlight of the day. Our keynote speaker is Professor Cristina Lafont, who is the Harold H. and Virginia Anderson Professor of Philosophy at Northwestern. She grew up in Valencia, Spain, and completed her undergraduate studies at the University of Valencia before going to Germany to complete her PhD at the University of Frankfurt, where she studied with the influential German philosopher Jürgen Habermas. She's been a professor since the mid-1990s at Northwestern, where she's received numerous research fellowships over the years, and where she served for the past 6 years as chair of the philosophy department. So she knows about academic politics as well, so I assume. But Professor Lafont has also been an internationally recognized leader in current debates about how to protect and revitalize democratic institutions. She grew up in a Spanish family that had been much affected by the authoritarian regime of Francisco Franco. So her commitment to democracy has historical and personal roots in her own life experiences in Europe, as well as her studies with philosophers such as Jürgen Habermas. You have a list of many of her books in your program materials, so I won't describe those publications now, but I do want to note this influential book, Democracy Without Shortcuts, A Participatory Conception of Deliberative Democracy, which was published in 2020 by Oxford University Press. And in 2022, she was a co-recipient of the Dr. Martin R. Leibowitz and Eve Llewellyn-Leibowitz Prize for Philosophical Achievement and Contributions. This prize is awarded each year by the Phi Beta Kappa Society in conjunction with the American Philosophical Association to a pair of philosophers who hold contrasting views of an important philosophical question that is of current interest to both philosophers and an educated public audience. So I suppose it is designed to honor debate and discussion. Professor Lafont's co-recipient of this prize in 2022 was Alex Guerrero, and the theme for their contrasting views was democracy. What's wrong and what should we do? And these questions lead to the key themes of today's talk, which is entitled Rescuing Democracy from Populism and Technocracy. And there will be a chance for some questions afterwards. Then there will be a reception downstairs. And tomorrow, there will be a series of panels, some panels in which people will respond to Professor Lafont's ideas. So please join me in welcoming Professor Cristina Lafont.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here. It's an honor, and thanks so much also for your kind introduction. It's great for me to be the keynote speaker for this year's Adams Symposium for the Humanities. So what I'm going to try to do is to give some answers to the question about how to build democracies in those very difficult times of populism and polarization. And so I will refer to some proposals for institutional reform that aim at increasing citizen participation, and also not just any kind of participation, but high quality, democratic, and informed participation. But my fear is that there are now an abundance of proposals for reform because everybody shares that sense that we are in a crisis, and so there are tons of proposals. But I fear that in some cases, although they may seem democratic because they have to do with citizen participation, they may actually, in the end, if they are implemented the wrong way, exclude the citizenry and force citizens to blindly defer to other actors. And that is a worry that I see across completely different types of proposals, but today I'm going to focus on some of them. And to see why this is, to me, a very minimal criterion for something to be democratic or for being democratizing or having a democratizing effect, which is that in whichever way citizens are involved, they should not be required to blindly defer to the decisions of actors over whom they have no democratic control. That's not very ambitious. I think that's a very minimal requirement. That should not be the case if we have a democracy. However, a lot of proposals do fail, in my view, for that criterion. So in order to justify why should we care about that minimal criterion, I would like to first kind of zoom out a little bit to see how did we got here, right? What is this crisis of democracy that everybody is talking about? So it is almost a cliche these days, especially in my field, democratic theory, to say that there is a crisis of democracy. And so I thought that maybe sometimes an image can be more powerful than 1,000 words. And so here this is the Global Democracy Index from 2023, the report. And as you probably can see, the index started in 2006, and it looks at the quality of democracy all over the world, wherever there are democratic societies. And last year, it was at the lowest level ever. And one of the reasons why it was kind of going down is because since 2016, the US has been demoted from a full democracy to a flawed democracy. And because it's a big country, it makes a kind of like a dent on that level. As you can see here, less than 8% of people in the world live in so-called full democracies. That has been going down and down in recent years. And almost a third of the world population live in authoritarian regimes, and this is going up and up. The lower the index go, the higher the authoritarian regimes level go, right? So this is very concerning, I think. What is also special or strange about the crisis of democracy that we talk about here and now is that it's not a case where citizens then stop enjoying the formal political rights that we are used to, like the right to vote, right, freedom of expression, association. So it's not a crisis where the military tanks get in and then citizens all at once don't have the right to vote. It's rather that these rights, although we just have them, as we always did, no longer seem to provide any power to actually influence political decisions by virtue of using, for example, your right to vote, which is very important, right? And so citizens are losing the political power to actually influence political decisions because a lot of what I call shortcuts have been built that enable powerful actors to bypass the citizenry while making decisions. And so it looks democratic, right? And you still have your rights and you can keep voting, but it looks as if it doesn't make any difference, right? One example among others is the fact that a lot of decision-making has moved beyond national borders, for example, right? So to build the kind of global economic order that we have now and have been built in the last 40 years, a lot of global economic institutions have been built with a lot of decision on the economy, which is decisions that directly impact people, whether people have housing or not, whether they have access to water. I mean, economic decisions can be very important, right? The problem is that these type of decisions are taken at the transnational level or at the global level. But there are no democratic institutions at the transnational level. We only have institutions where citizens can vote at the national level. And that is a problem because, yes, you can vote. It's like if you could only vote in your neighborhood, right? It's like, it's great, but for big constitutional decisions, the fact that I can vote in my neighborhood is not helping. I want to be able to reach that other level, right, of decision making. So this is the type of crisis that we have now, which is not the traditional type where you see the tanks coming in and then you lose your democratic rights, but then you are in an authoritarian regime, right? That's not. And the problem is that this makes citizens be kind of cynical about democracy, thinking that democracy has no value because they do have all these democratic rights, but they make no difference in terms of they actually having some power to determine what happens in their lives. And so as a consequence, citizens no longer see themselves represented in the political system. And that is the reason why, or that is what the current rise in populism draws from, that kind of resentment, that kind of feeling that the politicians don't listen to you, that they are not responsive to your needs and your interests, etc. And so it is also very often claimed that we're experiencing a kind of populist backlash, right, that is threatening democratic institutions. So, but then I was thinking, well, if it is a backlash against what, right? A backlash is a negative reaction to something else. And what is that something else? Obviously, it's not democracy, right? If it were democracy, people would be happy. And so something else is why I'm talking about populism and technocracy. Because these days it's not so obvious that technocracy is being recommended, because we had it for 40 years and it didn't do very well. However, we need to understand that it seems that democracies are kind of stuck between populism and technocracy, between two options, neither of which give us the kind of promise that democracy have given us, like we will be able to shape decisions, right? So what we had were, since the 80s, 4 decades of building up a global economic order along neoliberal lines, right? That but was based on technocracy and technocratic rule. That's why the institutions that were in charge of shaping that economic order were never thought to be necessarily democratic. Those are banks like the IMF or the World Bank or the WTO. Those were never meant to be democratic. However, they have shaped the kind of economy that we are now living under. That regime, if we want to call it that way, faced a big crisis in 2008. The ones here old enough remember the financial crisis of 2008. And then as a consequence, we got then austerity politics all over the place that made the situation of citizens even worse than it was already before the crisis, right? And then an unprecedented rise of inequality that has never been seen. So the famous or infamous trickle down became a trickle up, that I have somewhere the slide, but I don't have it here, that has not been seen since the 19th century, those levels of inequality. And so then, because of this type of technocratic rule of experts to whom you cannot influence directly by, for example, your votes or anything you decide, right? Populist leaders, for that reason, are promising to give citizens back control. Remember, that was the slogan of the infamous Brexit. And so they want to return control to the people by taking it away from the political elites and all these politicians, experts, right, that don't listen to the people. Unfortunately, the problem we have with populism, especially of this variety, but all of them, is that by the people, or the real people, they just mean the electoral majority, those who support them, right? They don't really mean all of us, or everyone who will be subject to decisions, which is what democracy promises, right? Now we are all going to have an equal say just because we are going to be under or coerced by the same decisions or laws, right? They just mean the real people. And then, of course, everyone else is excluded as the enemies of the people. And that's why we have a problem. And so, but obviously, if you think about it, if the exclusion was the problem to begin with, the reason why citizens are disheartened about democracy, why they don't believe in democracy anymore, then a different kind of exclusion is not going to do it. It's not going to solve the problem in any way, shape, or form. For all their differences, which are many, what populists and technocrats attacks against democracy have in common is that they question the fundamental democratic commitment to inclusion in decision-making. Normally, because populists and technocrats are each other's arch enemies, you tend to have the impression that they have nothing in common, that they are really, because they really are absolutely opposed. But if we look from the perspective of what democracy promises, they do have similarities, and we should care about those similarities, because both are, in different ways, forms of autocratization that threaten the democratic commitment to give all citizens an equal say on the decisions to which they are subject. And so populism endorses the rule of the electoral majority, and once, of course, they are elected, they make sure that they keep being elected. That's the trick for populism. You are not allowed to lose, because that is where it draws the legitimacy. But that electoral majority, as we by now know well, also here, is identified with the real people. And then minorities, whoever is either enemy of the people or at least not part of that real people, is expected to blindly defer to the decisions of the real people. Like on your face, we hear that all the time being said. By contrast, technocracy endorses the rule of a minority instead of being the rule of the majority, which is identified as the experts, right? The knowers, those who know, right? And they expect that the ignorant majority, the citizenry who doesn't know anything, right, especially about economics and this type of topics, then will blindly defer to the decisions of experts, and that's why things will go the right way. And so it's true that technocrats strongly oppose populists, right? They really are each other's arch enemies. However, they do not oppose populists because they think that there is something fundamentally wrong with exclusion, right? That's not why they are opposed. Rather, they oppose populists because, in their view, they favor the wrong exclusions, right? Both are going to exclude some group of people, and the question is who is the one that ought to be excluded, right? So for technocrats, it is the ignorant citizens that ought to be excluded from decision making, and not, as populists will have it, exactly the opposite, right? The political elites, the experts, those are the ones that, according to technocrats, ought to be ruling, right? And so they strongly disagree about who ought to rule. That's where they disagree. But what makes them both anti-democratic is not so much their views on who is supposed to rule, but rather their views on who is supposed to blindly obey. If you ask that question, then you start seeing how they are similar in many ways. Namely, they have a shared view that some groups of people do not deserve to have an equal say, that it is okay to simply impose political decisions on them, either because you want or because you are an expert. The fact is that that destroys the possibility of democracy, right? If you think about it, that's why blind deference is the problem here, because the idea is that it is okay. It's not that de facto people will have to obey decisions, it's that de jure they ought to obey those decisions for the reasons that they believe in. And so it is this autocratic expectation of blind deference that is okay, that is quintessentially incompatible with democratic inclusion. The promise of democracy is that no one, that everyone who is subject to the law will also be in some way shaping the law, will have an equal say on what the law ought to be, right? And that's why this expectation, and that's why I insist on it, is the first step on the what I call the downward spiral to authoritarianism that we are seeing now and experiencing in almost all democratic societies. And it's important to me because that is the step that you may miss. So we are down here, like we are already by polarization, privatization, or something like this. But then the question is, how did we go there, right? It's like, what happened, right? We were up there in theory, right, where we thought that democracy was taken for granted, right? And now we are down there. So the first step is the most important, in my view, is where you lose it, so to say. And so it's because the expectation of blind deference, the justifications of populists or technocrats, etc., of why blind deference is okay, what it does is establishing a kind of permanent division within the citizenry between those who are the authors of political decisions and those who are just subject to them. That is where you lose it. Because then, of course, people get very nervous about which group do I belong to, right? Like, am I going to be the one who has power, or is these other people who are going to have the power? And then you start going down, right? Then you get polarized because those are the ones who are not the real people, right? If you already accept that type of division, then you start going down, and it's very hard to stop going down, right? Because once it's clear that we are in different groups and that we have opposed interests and opposed views, it becomes very important that your group wins. The other group cannot have power under any circumstances because it's going to be a total disaster. And once you go down there, we know where it ends, because it ends exactly where it starts, with that distinction, that some are the ones who ought to rule and everyone else has to obey. And that is authoritarianism. There isn't any other particularity, right? And so accepting the first step division is the most important problem here, and where we need to be aware. If we want to repair democracy, we have to accept that anyone, even those nasty citizens one doesn't like, they also have to be coerced by the decisions we all make, and they ought to have a say. Yes, they do, as much as you do, right? We need to start repairing that type of assumption and recognizing that we are in that together, that we're stuck with the people we got. It's like in the family, just wishing your fellow citizens out of existence is not gonna work. That's kind of like the first level, right? And the problem is, and why I'm insisting there is because, why is it that it's so hard to stop it once you are here? Because we are really down there. The problem then is that populist technocrats too is just not in this moment, historical moment, but let's stick to the populist, which is the moment we're having experience right now, right? The problem is once you start thinking in those kind of divided ways, then democratic solutions become very implausible, right? Think about it. It's like people are not willing, even me, myself, I mean, I speak for myself, right? Once it's clear that we are in that kind of extreme options, you start not being willing to think that we are going to cooperate, right? That we may find compromises, that we may actually be able to work together, right? You start really having doubts about whether democracy works at all. But in fact, it's just a feature of the fact that we started dividing ourselves, right? Because it's something that we didn't have before, right? And so once you are there, democracy and democratic solutions that work based on cooperation of everybody being included start looking extremely implausible. And that's why you get that sense that democracy doesn't really work, that it takes too long, that it's not possible, it was never efficient to begin with, right? And then, of course, technocrats and populists can lure citizens into the anti-democratic temptation, which is what I call shortcuts. That is the problem. Once you start doubting that it's worth trying the long democratic way that takes so long and trying with these nasty people, I mean, forget it. Then anybody telling you, hey, you can take a shortcut, you can get the outcomes you want, if only you leave all these other fellow citizens behind. That's how you get there. That is the temptation. That is the promise of populism and also of technocracy. My argument, like in the book, that I made very clear, because I don't think either populists or technocrats believe in democracy. You can't just tell them that what's wrong with it is that it's not democratic, that it's not including everyone. They'll be like, right, that's exactly what we should be doing. Okay, so then what argument can one use if one would like to defend democracy? So in my book, I do both arguments. I have the intrinsic argument, the intrinsic value of democracy argument, but I just in case I have the teleological argument or the instrumental argument about why is it that we should stick to democracy? Why is it that they are promising a shortcut that's a way of magical thinking? Why is it that it cannot work? And I think that is important because we get so much pushback into thinking that democracy never works. And I'm like, well, it has worked in the past. And why is it that leaving citizens behind is not a way of resolving the difficult problems that we face, right? We should be pushing back on the idea that what they are promising will actually work, even in terms of the outcomes that they promise, right? So the problem with why I call it a shortcut is because they tell us all the problems that we have. Citizens are ignorant, they are polarized, they don't know each other, they are so different. They tell us all these problems that we have. And then, of course, public debate is horrible and there's misinformation. Okay, they tell us all that. And then if you look at the solutions, anything they propose, right, none of them tries to tackle the problems. Like, I want to know if people are disinformed and ignorant, we are, right? I want to know how you're going to help us be better informed, right? That should be the kind of thing, right? No, they don't. The idea is that you should leave citizens with their disagreements, their ignorance, everything, forget them. And then you take the shortcut, right? And then leave other people, for example, populist leaders or experts or whoever doesn't have those problems, right? Decide for you, and then the outcomes will just happen, so to say. Then you will get what you wanted, right? In the case of technocrats or elite democrats, as they are usually called, they hope that better outcomes will be achieved faster if experts make the political decisions and the ignorant citizens don't try even to know anything. In fact, technocrats who are still alive, believe me, and kicking, especially in the disciplines of political science and economics, they have long claimed that citizens' ignorance is rational. This is actually a dogma, as it turns out, in political science even. I'm not a political scientist, so I always be astonished that this is taken for granted. It is rational for you to be ignorant because your influence is so tiny when you vote, right? Why would you waste your time informing yourself? You think about it. Why would you waste your time? I'm like, I can't think of reasons why people may want to waste their time. And so the idea is that this is not something they should overcome. That's the point of calling it rational. The idea is like, we are okay. We can live society as ignorant. And by that, when they show us what they mean manipulated, polarized, racist, xenophobic, you name it. When they mean ignorant, they really mean the real thing, like horrible. Okay, so we can leave them all like this, and we can have better outcomes. We can have a better society. And I'm always like, I would think that societies cannot be any better than their members, right? Like, you are not going to have a non-racist or lofty, whatever, non-xenophobic society if you just let the right people pass legislation and everyone else is still a racist. Like, really? And this is realist. The lofty people, naive people, are we those who defend that democracy can work, right? Just, no, that's very naive. But the idea that you could have a better society by leaving citizens exactly as bad as they tell us that they are, to me, is astonishing. But that's what you will find if you dedicate yourself to read this whole work on citizens' ignorance, which keeps being produced again and again. And so the practical recommendation that technocrats uniformly endorse is to minimize the participation of citizens in decision-making. That's how you know. So you look at the books. I'm here, have a quote from one of the famous elite Democrats, Brian Kaplan, who is an economist, actually, where he puts exactly, when you look in the book, what is the recommendation? What are we supposed to do politically? So as he puts it, we have to reduce or eliminate efforts to increase voter turnout. Okay, that's a quote. So I'm just so you realize that the technocrats are telling people we know, right, what we are supposed to be doing. I mean, we recognize the agenda of repressing voter turnout. So it's alive and kicking. It's not just, happening in the academia. So that's the technocratic option and the justification for losing democracy. But if we look now at populists who look really very different, right, politically, they are on the other side of the spectrum, whichever spectrum that is, right? They also hope to get better outcomes faster. They really are the ones with no patience with democracy, right? If only the real people were to make all the decisions, right, then we could get where we want to be, right? We have been slowed down, for example, by opposition parties, the free press, the independence of judicial institutions. All of that, it slows us down, right? Because some minorities try to get their way. If we could just simply forget them, the real people, the majority, would just get it done, right? And that's why they have no patience with the independence of judicial institutions or with the free press. All of that puts sand on the road of democracy and makes it inclusive. It enables people, yes, minorities, whoever, right, to be included in the conversation before the decisions are imposed on them, and that slows down as a matter of fact. Populists have no patience with that. And so the appeal to democratic values is the value of the majority, right? They will tell you that people should be making decisions and not unelected judges or not elites or not experts. The play is the division. We are all here, and those are the ones that are the enemy. And the problem, as I was saying, is that, of course, they have already, to make that type of recommendation, you have to already have divided the citizenry, and accepting that is actually the real problem to me, more than the fact that the solution, of course, is not going to be democratic, and in fact, it's also not going to work, in my view. Because the problem is, and I see it all over the place, is that you can leave citizens out as decision makers, right? Depending on how you organize the political system, but you cannot leave them out as decision takers. That's what they forget, and they are supposed to be the realistic people, right? The problem is that they are really focused on passing legislation, right? And if only you have the people who pass legislation be the ones you like, then you get the decisions you want, and that sounds great. The problem is, we don't want legislation. We want outcomes. We want that the goals of the legislation are actually realized. But those who have to realize, who have to do their part, are the citizens. They have to make the sacrifices, they have to change their lives, they have to change whatever, their consumption patterns, whatever, depending on what the case is, right? And they are not going to do that They are going to vote with their feet if they are not convinced, right, that those decisions that have been legislated about are the right ones, especially if there is minimal civic freedoms. You don't even need political freedoms. You have civic freedoms, unless you put them all in jail, right, and force them, there is no way. Think, for example, of the pandemic. We just had it, right? It's wonderful to pass amazing legislation. You can have mandatory vaccines, masks, you name it, lockdowns, whatever, right? If people don't do their part, if they are not going to be vaccinated, you get literally the legislation. It's like, beautiful, I love it, right? But what I wanted actually was to fight the pandemic. And it takes two to tango. You cannot fight the pandemic by passing legislation. You need the people behind. They had to do their part. They had to do the sacrifices. They had to accept, therefore, for example, that those decisions are fair. You want to know whether everyone else is being burdened as much as you are. You want to know whether it's reasonable. You want to know whether it's violating the rights of some and not of others. You want to know all these things before you are willing to actually put yourself on the line, right? I always get pushback since I published my book about the example of climate change. Someone will object and say, this is very nice. We don't have time for democracy because climate change is now. We just have to get it done, right? And I always think, like, what do these people imagine is going to take really, literally, to fight climate change? It's as if we just pass legislation and then comes the end, like in the Hollywood movies, right? You just go home and forget about what happened then. It's like, no, let me tell you what happened then. You pass the legislation and then what? People will have to change their consumption patterns. They will have to stop driving cars. Whatever it is huge sacrifices they will have to make, right? And you can't expect them to do it just simply because blindly defer because someone said so. This is not how it works. So to me, the idea that we need to renounce to democracy, right, because it's kind of slow, that's not how I think of democracy. To me, it's not a lofty ideal. It's not something, I think that democracy is, to the contrary, is the realization that there are no shortcuts, that there is no way, that if you want something done, you have to take the people with you. You can't leave them behind. And if that is the case, you better start investing in the only option, which is to try to convince, to change the hearts and minds of those nasty citizens that really disagree with you, right? And you really dislike them. Well, you have to bring them on board, right? And you can either change the hearts and minds, right? Or you can coerce them into obedience, right? But that's it. Democracy is the first option, and authoritarianism is the second. And we see it. I mean, we saw what happened in the pandemic in China, for example, right? You can't get people vaccinated against their will and masked against their will too. I mean, you can do this kind of thing. Whether you can make people not racist by virtue of putting them in jail, I doubt it. But for some limited goals, you may achieve them by coercing people, right? But that is what it's going to take. Don't give me a lofty story about populism, you know what I mean? Like, no. You are either going to be authoritarian or you will have to go the slow way, the long way, the nasty way, where you have to try to change people's minds. And that takes forever and is very hard, right? But we end up together. That's the only possibility, right? This long road is the only road that actually will make people go alone, do their part, because they find at least that those decisions are reasonable. You won't have everyone agreeing on any decision, but at least agreeing that even though it may not be the one they prefer, that at least they think is not violating their fundamental rights, is not completely unfair, right? That's the kind of conversation you need. And then you can go with majority decisions, but only up to some point, right? And so for me, I think that in this moment, first, citizens are the only ones who can defend democracy, because frankly, we are the ones who have the most to win, right? If you already have power, you have to share power and lose power, right? That's not nice. So I have never seen people voluntarily give up their power. I don't think that's the case. I think democracy is always taken, never given. And so we are the ones who can do it or not do it. No one is going to do it for us because no one really has such an interest in that possibility succeeding. Okay. So, but can we stop this downward spiral, especially at this point where we are really in a dangerous position already? I mean, we have advanced in the spiral. Can this spiral be resisted? Okay. So what could we do given the bad situation we are in? Okay. So if declaring defeat is not an option, right? No matter how easy or hard it may be, right? we have to confront the actual problems head on. That is going to be the difference. We need to understand the problems we got and see whether we can do something about the problems, not about looking for a shortcut. Okay, so we have two types of problems, very obvious ones, right? One is the quality of information and public debate. That's typical when there is polarization and fragmentation. People are in their bubbles, they don't even understand, they don't know what the heck these other people believe, okay? So we need to have a conversation among citizens, but you cannot have a conversation if you don't know what the considered views of the other people that disagree with you are, right? If we don't know that, that's it. You can't have a debate, because if you know that, then you can first think about whether they may be right, whether they have a point or not, what the reasons are, or you may bring contra evidence, you may show why it's not the case, whatever, but you cannot have a decent conversation if you don't know who believes what. If you don't know if what you are seeing in the public sphere really represents the view of some extraordinary citizens, or it's just the trolls from Russia, it's just the manipulative views that are being put by people who have money. And we know that that is the case. So how can we tell? We don't know, right? Okay, so we need to have some way of improving public debate and public opinion. We need that. And that is a huge umbrella, right? We have the social media problem, the business model of the social media that keeps giving you only the views that you want to see, right, and then puts you in a bubble. I mean, this is a huge problem, not just a little problem. Okay, but something in the vicinity of being able to know, first, information about the problems we face that you can trust and rely on, and information about the opinions of the fellow citizens that disagree with you, or that are different, that are in different circumstances, right? If we don't know that, there is no way we can help ourselves towards decisions that can be common, right? And the other thing, which is what, if any poll you look at in the whole world about what do citizens say is wrong with democracy in their countries, and it doesn't matter which country you look at, the polls all say the exact same thing, right? The main complaint is the lack of responsiveness, the sense that the political decisions have nothing to do with their interests, their needs, what they want to happen, their objectives, etc., right? And if you ask them what they think is their preferred solution, what could be done, is citizen participation, increasing citizen participation, which makes sense because the idea is that we should be able to set the political agenda. That will be unbelievable, but at least to shape political decisions depending on what we want, what problems we got, what interests we have, etc., right? Okay, so keeping in mind that those are like the biggest problems we got with regard to rescuing democracy, there is a huge movement these days. It started in the 80s and it was much more experimental than it has become by now, of organizing new venues for citizen participation, like citizens' assemblies, citizens' panels, citizen juries. There are many derivative polls, there are tons of them, right? That, as I said, it started really much more in an experimental mode. A lot of political scientists got together and organized them to see what happens, for example, with no political implications. But by now, I'm sure you have heard about some of them. Maybe the most famous is the Irish Convention that organized a citizen assembly that led to constitutional amendments on abortion and same-sex marriage. You may have heard about that. In France, they have the citizens' assemblies on climate change. There is been organized all over the world because now politicians do understand that political participation or citizen participation is the deficit that they have and why people are really not happy with democracy. So now it's not just an academic issue, it's a real experimentation in the whole world. Okay, if you are interested, I think something you could look at very easily because it's not for specialists and it's wonderful, is the OECD report from 2020, Innovative Citizen Participation and New Democratic Institutions, Catching the Derivative Wave. This is available online, you can find it there, and it gives you an overview of all those types of what is technically called deliberative mini-publics. And I'm gonna call them mini-publics just not to have to say each one of them. But so here, this is one page from the report. You can see there are tons of models, very different models, and they have different, the length, for example, how long people are meeting, right? But they all have something in common, which is that they randomly select ordinary citizens to participate. It's like in the jury system, right? So they get randomly selected, but they are trying to get a sample that is representative of the constituency, of the diversity of opinions, socioeconomic status, gender, ethnicity, wherever is relevant, right? They try to get a sample of ordinary citizens. You saw it here, right? This was the French Citizens Convention for Climate Change. And you see, it's people like you and me. These are completely ordinary people that were randomly selected to participate in the Citizens Assembly, right? And they get things that we don't get normally. First, they get high quality information on the issue that they are going to deliberate about. And high quality information means that they can also say who they want to listen to. It's not that it's pre-selected by someone which information they get. That will leave way for manipulation, etc. No, they can say, no, we want to hear of all the stakeholders, the relevant ones for whichever issue is it that they are discussing. So they get to have the quality information. And because they are a very diverse group of people, right, what represents all kinds of walks of life in society, right, they get to deliberate with one another, which is something that we usually cannot do, right? Usually we are with people who are like us, at least geographically, for example. Typically, you are with people who are near you, or you are in a bubble in the social media of people who have the same opinions as you, or you are in the same profession as the people you met, etc. And this is the huge difference in the case of mini publics, that they get a group that really represents society, and that's something that we usually don't have a chance to get, to even have a chance to talk to people who are so different, right? And so that is what is so different and special. But what is very promising, because now it has been more than 40 years replicating experiments in cases where it wasn't really about making political decisions, but also in the cases where it has been actually organized politically, two things have become clear by now, because it's like all over the world. It doesn't matter where you organize them. One is that citizens can become well-informed. As a matter of fact, within, you can see, weekends, 3 days, 8 days, wherever, with access to high quality information, they get to be able to make their minds on highly complex issues. That's a fact. In fact, they tend to come up with solutions that are more creative than what the politicians have given them as the menu of possible options. They receive typically, or from experts, a menu of possibilities, right, to discuss and see which one. They come up with new ones. It's like, no, but why not doing this other thing that nobody had thought about? Right? And they bring that as a recommendation to the public authority who organized them, right? So that's one very interesting thing to know about us. We have been really insulted. You cannot imagine until what level, right? Insulting citizens is okay. Insulting women, insulting African American, no longer okay. But citizens, oh my God, if you look at the citizen ignorance literature, oh my God, they are tribalistic, infantile, everything, you name it, because nobody knows who is the citizen, right? And I'm like, well, but those are the arguments we had for women, why women should not vote. They were identical. But now, no, with ascriptive characteristics, no, they are not going to say it in public. But citizens, oh, you can insult them. Well, as it turns out, we aren't that ignorant, really, or we are not damned to be that ignorant. We can very well, if they give us the information, figure out what we want politically, right? It's not that we are going to be scientists. The other thing, is amazing, is that citizens do not polarize. It's the exact opposite of what, for example, Cass Sunstein had speculated with the idea that if you force people to be together with people who are very different from them, they will get polarized. Each one will stick to their own and will be more extreme than they were before. And that's true in normal experiments. The difference is that in mini publics, people are randomly selected. So that you don't have the cover of being in kind of your group and then those you know are the others. You are like in an elevator. Like, it's like, who are those people? You are alone and you don't know those people. Nobody's there representing any particular group, right? Those are people like you and me, individual people who happen to be in an elevator. If you put people in that situation, they do not polarize because they are not thinking in those terms. First, they don't know who is who. They want to know what you think. They see themselves as individuals. So, but that has been really shown again and again. And that's why they can actually agree and change their minds. They change their minds drastically in all these citizens' assemblies. It's amazing, because all political scientists are tracking that, right? And there, for example, they poll them at the beginning, and they have some opinion, and 80% is in favor. And after, and it's just a weekend, sometimes 3 weekends, something like this. then 20% support that option, which before it was 80%. That type of drastic changes of opinion happen, and no polarization. So this is, obviously, you can see why people who come even close to this type of experimentation are enthusiastic about, oh my God, this is exactly what we need, the two things we needed. No polarization and the ability to actually know what your citizens think, and that they can reach considered judgments. They can figure out what they think about some political problem, which we normally cannot do. Okay, so if you look here very quickly, if you compare the kind of public debates that we have access to, doesn't matter whether it's TV, it's the social media, whatever, here, right? The public sphere that we have. If you compare that with the situation, the conditions under which those randomly selected members of citizens' assemblies are, you see all the difference in the world, right? You have inclusion there. You can hear the voices of marginalized people, right? You never heard that in the public sphere. Anybody who does not have the money to come into the public sphere is not there, right, represented. Then you can have inclusion in terms of both voice and presence, right? Then also, you avoid the problem of influence of money and capturing institutions, because those people are there just simply because they were randomly selected. They have no agenda. You cannot co-opt them, you cannot buy them, because there's nothing to be bought, right? And nobody knew in advance who was gonna be selected, right? For all these type of reasons, they tend to focus on the public good. There's people like you and me put in that situation, right? And they get high quality information, any type they think they need, from any stakeholders, etc. So it's exactly the opposite of what we normally experience in the public sphere. And so from the point of view of the fact that these institutions could be replicated at all levels, local, municipal, national, wherever, it's been done now globally. There are a lot of global citizen assemblies on climate change, because it's a global problem, right? You put people together, right? Given that, how could we help ourselves, right? If we knew. So the condition that everybody who talks about these institutions is that you need to have already something we don't have yet, which is that citizens are familiar with the institution. You need to have many more than so far, although a lot have been produced everywhere in the world, so that people understand what is so special about mini-publics compared to any other source of information, while listening to what the mini-publics recommend and not what your favorite political party recommends, for example, right? Or why not both, but okay. So the thing is, what happens in these mini-publics is that, obviously, because this is ordinary citizens talking to one another, they immediately filter out the kinds of noise we hear in the public sphere constantly, because somebody is paying literally to get those voices there, right? When you hear those voices, you don't know if it's people who really believe that, or some groups who are trying to make sure that this voice is being listened to. That doesn't happen in mini-publics, of course, because it's these people looking at what resonates with their interests, their needs, etc., right? And then what you get, first of all, is that it reduces the cost for all of us to figure out what matters, so to say, for, I don't know, energy transition. It's a very complex topic. I don't have the time to, so I'm ignorant, as the political scientists say, right, to figure out that one and all the other ones, right? We can't do it together for all the issues. Okay, they do it for us. And you can trust that the information they give you is what people like you and me think matters for the issue, whichever issue it is that you are debating. And the really important information, in my view, is not to hear the recommendations of people like you, the ones you like, right? What is really nice is that they tell you what are the most important reasons in favor and against this type of decisions, which means you get to know the considered judgments of the citizens that disagree with you. What matters to them really? Well, that's what we need. If you want to have a decent debate, that's what you need to know. What matters to all of us really once we are informed. That's exactly what you need to have. And we don't have, because we can't tell the difference. When we hear things in the public sphere, we don't know, right? Who is putting those views out, etc. Okay, so they could help us if we knew what they do. Same way that we are familiar with the jury institution, right? We know randomly selected citizens get called to work in the jury. We know how it works. We know what it is. have problems, no problems, but we know the institutions. If we knew this one, we knew why it's worth listening to them. What they will tell us is not. What the majority recommends may not be what we believe, but it tells you why the majority thinks, once it has been informed, that this is what they should do. And you want to know that one to fight it out, for example, because you may be disagreeing. But then you are having your fellow citizens in your radar and not manipulative noises that who knows whether it's China or Russia who has an interest in spreading those views. You don't know it's your fellow citizens. Okay. But of course, that only tells us why it will be so interesting to listening to them. The biggest question, the hardest question, of course, is what could they do for us? What functions they could fulfill? And this is where the debate is on mini publics, not only among politicians, but also among political scientists, philosophers, everybody who has to do with it, right? And so the question is, what could they do for us? What political functions they could fulfill? And here, I want to say that there are two perspectives. But in fact, unfortunately, there is a predominant perspective that I strongly disagree with. And so I'm trying to defend the other perspective. But it's not really fair to say that there are two. I'm hoping there will be two. Okay, but so far, the question is, okay, anybody involved with this worries about the fact that so far most mini publics in general are advisory. So some public authority wants to know what the public thinks and organize a citizen assembly, for example, in order to get recommendations. That's the usual case. However, because nobody knows them, pretty much the citizenry doesn't know, is not familiar with them, right? What has happened so far is that it's very easy for politicians to ignore the recommendations when they don't like them. This is the kind of the most obvious case. It's like, okay, you organize the whole thing, pay a lot of money, people are energized, amazing, the participants love it, and then it ends up in a drawer and nothing happens. This is again and again the case. And of course, people engaged with it are very frustrated by that, right? And so because of that experience, also even worse, right? Cases like when Macron organized the first citizens assembly, politicians don't want to make decisions that are unpopular, had the yellow vest demonstrations against him, and he said, oh, I am going to organize a citizen assembly, and I'm going to blame them. It's the citizens who want it, not me, right? Okay, when it didn't work out, because citizens came up with ideas that were not in the menu, then they were ignored. That's kind of, okay. So that you understand why are people asking the question of how much power should derivative mini publics have, right? If they only have advisory power, or power not, if they only have an advisory function, right, and they can just simply be ignored at no cost, obviously they cannot make a difference. And that's why it's driving everyone and their mothers who are engaged with this into they need to have more power. We have to give decision making authority to those mini publics. It's not good enough that they make recommendations. The authorities should bind themselves to actually implement them no matter what they are, right? That's where the argument is going. And if you go into the question of how much power, well, people are thinking, think about it. If the politicians or the public authorities tells you which question and which options you have in your menu, to what extent are you really, once you get informed, they want to actually do other things because they realize that's not the right way of thinking about it, oftentimes. Yeah? So then you get into, no, they should set the agenda. They should be able to decide then what to do, and not just something that has been given by politicians. Okay, so that's going in the direction, no, they should have sovereign power. That's what parliaments can do. They can decide what issues they take in, right? And they are not being given by others. Okay, so if you ask this question, it's very hard not to end up on that extreme. The problem with mini publics is that citizens cannot be accountable. Not because they are bad, it's because they are citizens, right? We are not accountable when we vote, in the sense that I don't have to tell anyone why I voted the way I did, in any way, shape, or form. I vote as I see fit, because we are citizens. We are where the buck stops. We are the constituent power, right? And so we decide as we see fit. Okay, that means we are not representing others. When I have been selected as a citizen, I may be a woman, I may be a philosopher, but I'm not representing women and philosophers. No, I'm me deciding what I think should be done, which is beautiful, it's great. The problem is that you have like 200 people there, and they are going to decide for 300 million people. And they are competing with us, they are citizens like we are, right? But we are excluded. So you may still begin to see what the problem is, right? In giving them that power with no accountability. They'll decide as they see fit, and we will blindly defer because there's nothing else that could be done, right? So that model, if you accept that that is the question, let's add to another shortcut with no democracy, right? It is like, well, because we trust them because they are like us, so they have a kind of populist view of representation, because they aren't corrupt politicians. Whatever they decide is okay. I'm like, really? I mean, this is disenfranchising all of us, right? And the proposals, I mean, my partner, Philosopher, who won the Leibovitz Prize with me, Guerrero, his book is coming out now. My other book is coming out now too. He's defending lotocracy, to dismantle elections, political parties, and to just have all the assemblies being decided by lottery, right? And yeah, I got the prize also because I'm against it, as you can see now. Okay, so in my view, the problem we get there is because, of course, it's very hard. People trying to push me at the beginning into, well, but then what do you want? Merely advisory function that is ignored? It's like, well, then don't organize them. Like, if you don't want to give them any power, then don't do them, because it's a waste of money and effort, right? Okay, so something is wrong here, right? Because you don't have a position that makes sense. So I think that is the wrong question. We should be asking a completely different question. The question is, who should we empower by using mini publics? When you ask that question, then you see the difference, right? Do we want to empower 20 randomly selected individuals? Really? Why? Who are they? Like, why would anybody want that? How is that helping democracies? Like, think about why we got here. Remember the beginning of my talk. It's like, we wanted to be empowered. And the question is, who could help us, right? But if we are going to empower them to do the getting informed, the thinking, the deliberating, and the deciding for us, and we are just going to obey, how is that helping the problem we got into? So we are forgetting the origin of the problem. No, we wanted to be the ones who are empowered, and we are hoping that that is an institution that can help us because we can trust it and because it can do things for us that no other institution actually does for a variety of reasons. We can trust newspapers to do it for us, we can trust politicians to do it for us, but we can trust ordinary citizens to figure out and to tell us what the considered views of us are if we are well informed. And then from there, we can decide what we want to do. So if you change the perspective and you accept that, right, if you obviously don't think that a form of rule of the few is helping here, no matter how nice those few are. I mean, they may be nice, but who are they? Okay. If you think that it should be us citizens who are empowered, then the question is, how can we use this institution as a kind of mediation between citizens on the one hand and the political system on the other, instead of thinking of it as another institution in the political system that bypasses the citizenry, right? Like, you were complaining that the parliament is not responsive. So you are going to put random people there, but they are going to decide on their own. How is that helping you? That's kind of what I'm trying to convey, right, as the problem, right? And so just because, I don't know, I'm probably running out of time, but there are many, many proposals that could help us in the way I'm thinking. The interesting thing is that some of the political scientists who make those proposals, they also make the other ones. And I'm always like, I can't believe it. Like Fishkin, he can make exactly proposals that I think are exactly on the right track. And then next page, the other ones. And for all he knows, it's okay. And I'm like, but it makes all the difference in the world. Don't you see it, Jimmy? Like, it's not the same thing. Okay. So trying to put together, and briefly, the types of proposals that I think are participatory, that really will empower citizens, they all are a variation of ways in which we could improve mechanisms for citizens' initiatives, right? In this country, half of the states have the ability to organize citizen initiatives, others not. In many countries, it's not possible, in other countries it is, right? But that's something familiar that we know. In particular, for example, in Oregon, the citizen initiative system in Oregon has a citizen jury attached to it, where before people are asked to vote on something, right, for some ballot proposition, they organize a citizen jury that provides information about what is at stake, what is the most important thing of the decision that citizens are asked to make, and then gives the most important reasons in favor, to vote in favor, and the most important reasons to vote against. And this is in the pamphlet that all eligible voters get when they are going to vote. Of course, I don't know if by now citizens understand in Oregon the peculiarity of that information. They may not know that is an information they should trust, and it's actually very interesting, and it's not like any other, like the parties, they also give information, the organizations, who knows, right? But you can think of that model as something where if we were to use mini-publics, we could improve it infinitely. The problem these days for voting on anything is that we are ignorant. Yes, they are right. I don't disagree on that one. How are we not going to be ignorant? There are millions of problems we need to fix. We can't know them all. Okay. What I disagree about is that we have to be ignorant and that we should accept it and be ruled by others. That I don't buy. But so if we are ignorant, how can we help ourselves? Okay. If we organize mini-publics, you could have a way in which when you are called to vote on something, on a ballot proposition, or even a referendum, you could have this type of information, right? So that will help to improve the quality of voting, which is the most important power we have. But we vote now without knowing anything. I mean, Brexit is the example, right? It's like vote, yes, no. And it's like, but just know what? I mean, what happened? What are the options? No, just vote, just no. Well, then Brexit happened. I mean, that's the problem, right? But we are always in this situation with many occasions where we had to vote. If we could have information, we could vote much better. But it has to be information we trust. And not only information, democratic information about what matters to our fellow citizens, and not just simply what is technically feasible, right? Okay, so but then that will be with regard to the quality of the information you get. But the other thing is that if we could convene so many deliberative mini-publics at many levels for many types of decisions, that will help by allowing us to lower the threshold of signatures. The difference now, no matter which system you look at, is that you cannot have tons of citizens' initiatives because the authority in question cannot review, say, 3,000 per month or something, right? You can't have that many initiatives. So the way to make them manageable so that you end up with 1 or 2 or 3 or something like this is to hide the level of signatures, with the idea that if you have 500,000 signatures means a lot of citizens care about it. That's the idea. But as we know, the reality is that you have to have the resources to gather 500,000 signatures. I mean, people like you and me cannot do that. No matter how important the issue may be for us, we can't get it done because we don't have the resources to begin with, right? So, but imagine that we could multiply. Because citizens' assemblies, by comparison, are very cheap. You can organize tons of them. Even now, they are trying to make them possible online, and that will make them cost zero, right? Because you have to pay for hotels, people have to go places, right? But we can do it in Zoom, maybe it's much cheaper, right? So if we could have a lot of them, we citizens could try to get decisions to be put on a vote, either by the public authority in question, or the politicians in question, or in a ballot proposition, or a referendum. You can think of many ways in which we could be the ones ratifying those decisions, right? And the deliberative mini-publics will be organizing them, improving the initiatives, ranking them, for example, by urgency or by importance, if they get tons of them and you organize a lot of them, right? They could help us to really make the system responsive to what we want. If you think about it in different models, it's clear that given that we disagree about a lot of things, in many cases, whether it's politicians in them having to debate them, say in parliament, right, and decide, or whether it's even a ballot proposition, a lot of initiatives may go down. People may not agree, and then you may not get anything done, and then you have wasted your time, so to speak, right? But think of all the cases that are driving the populist. All those cases where we know, I have the examples, I look at Wikipedia, there are so many, oh my God, right? Cases of legislation that citizens want to happen by 80%, 90%. And can never make it through the legislature. Think of all of those decisions. That's what pissed people off, right? Because in cases where we are 50-50, you understand, you need compromises, whatever. But in cases where the population just wants it 90%, there is no reason why they should be intractable, and politicians will not be deciding them because it's either not electorally a good idea, it's not popular, whatever the case may be, right? For all those cases, if you could have this type of venue, obviously the discretion of politicians not to take on those decisions will be reduced massively if these were institutionalized that way, right? That will help us be energized and believing into participating in having debates, etc., because you think that the decisions that matter to you have a real chance to be put on the agenda really, and actually even to be decided even by us ourselves, right? So that's kind of the promise, if you think about it, of what could happen with this amazing institution that happens to have all the things we need. How many times in history institutions come along that will help us, all citizens, right? No, normally that never happens, right? This is one of those cases where we could, and that's why a lot of people are enthusiastic about it. But precisely for that reason, I think it would be a shame to waste this opportunity into make it into another shortcut that will do nothing, right? And will leave the citizenry out, right? As it always happens, right? So in my view, it matters. If you ever are in contact with anything related to mini-publics, be aware, so to say, it could be an institution for us, or it can be a shortcut that really cements the rule of the few. So, thank you.
Thank you let me see if I have this on. So we have just a few moments for some questions about how these mini publics can be constructed and what they can do. Does anyone have a question or comment to begin with? Over here. Oh, over here. Yes.
So I own a factory and it's polluting a community, and a whole lot of people get a lot of signatures and they come to me to regulate the factory, right? And I need to be reelected, so I want their votes, right? But I need the factory owner's money in order to run, right? So what do? If I go with the votes, I lose the factory and the money. If I go with the factory, then I can take that money and I can make advertisements. You know, with the factory workers, we're going to lose our jobs. We need to work slower. We need to have, it's too expensive. It's going to raise your taxes. So the factory worker is going to win despite the citizens group and all those signatures.
Yeah. No, those are the real problems. Right? People have different interests, they have different views, they want different things, they have different priorities. So that's a fact. I don't see politicians as corrupt. I couldn't, because if I did, then I wouldn't believe in representative democracy. There is corrupt people everywhere. There are politicians that are corrupt, of course. There are many, but politicians face real choices. For example, Guerrero argues that there is all these, you know, subsidies on agriculture because the lobbies of agriculture. I'm like, wait, remember, food security is something we all care about. There is something very special about agriculture. If you say fossil fuels, I don't know, but agriculture is like, are you kidding me? Like, every country has to preserve food security. You cannot depend, as we saw with the vaccines, on China, whether you eat or not, or your population. So yes, there are subsidies for agriculture because agriculture is a very peculiar thing that humans need, namely to eat. Okay, so to me, politicians are facing the questions that we're asking. If you don't have the revenue, the factory is closed and there are no jobs, that's not good for anybody, right? And if people only care about pollution, but they don't figure out how to make it also work so that the jobs are not lost, then we haven't done anything. Then you have people who want something, some people who want another thing, and politicians or whoever has to decide has no real choices. Okay, here comes mini-public. The interesting thing about mini-publics, nobody will be paying attention to them if it were for the fact that once you put people like us in a room facing those things, we start thinking very strongly about how to keep both things we need. You know what I mean? Nobody's just going to say, you know what, all the factories closed, the heck with jobs. No citizen will say that, right? Look and say, okay, how can we do that? How can that work? That is what is special of having people with different views talking together about what to do. It should be possible with political parties. It's not working for a lot of reasons. But it is possible among citizens. That's the beauty. That's what Macron didn't like. That the idea was, oh, we have to increase the price for public transportation. That's how the yellow vest demonstration started. Because of ecological reasons, and a lot of people want to improve against climate change, especially in Europe, right? The idea was like, this has to happen. Of course, what happens? The city assembly decided, no, you do not increase the price of public transportation, right, which we need for fighting against climate change. You get the revenue from somewhere else, right? And they made other proposals that Macron didn't like, and the thing died, right? So yes, your question is very serious, but I'm telling you, actually, that works. And sometimes it may, sometimes it may not.
Let's bring in a couple of different questions and see what, yes, let's get 2 or 3 questions and then you can try to respond.
Okay.
You brought up on the screen a picture of the OECD report from 2020. Is there a subtitle? Or is there just one report that they put out that year, or?
No, there is a continuation, but this report.
What is the title of that report?
No, this one is Catching the Derivative Wave. Let me go back, and you can Google it. It's Innovative Citizen Participation and New Democratic Institution.
More slowly, please. I can't read it from here.
Right. I was afraid that maybe even though it's big, it cannot be read.
It says Innovative Citizen Participation and New Democratic Institutions. That's it.
But I think if you, the subtitle...
Innovative citizen what?
Innovative Citizen Participation.
If you write down Catching the Derivative Wave, that's what everybody knows. If you put OECD Catching the Derivative Wave, you get it.
Okay. So let's ask another question.
There are other reports. In 2022 was another one. So they are excellent. They are really, because they just give overview. They give information. They are not defending or doing anything. But the beauty of this one is that it gives you the overview of what there is and why and which model does what, etc. So that's very informative.
Thank you.
If I understood the question of the gentleman on the end, I think it was not in the deliberative process of the many public that he saw the problem, but when you came to a vote of the general citizenry on it, how do you keep that from being tainted by money, advertising on one point of view? And so maybe the people who want climate change addressed in certain ways are very serious and they have deliberative reasons. But when you get oil companies with their resources advertising against their proposal, the people who are making the final decision in the public initiative are not equally informed.
Right.
So let's take one more point. So the problem is money is going to distort what happens here. Can you take one more question in the back? Oh, okay. You had a question also? Okay.
We can do both.
Let's 2 comments and then, so we're dealing with the problem of money is going to distort all this. And what's the other problem?
Have you tried to do a test of your model of civic life in Evanston, Illinois, or other local area?
Have you ever tried to do a test where this actually works? And yes, and one other question here. So you actually bring people together with different points of view.
I mean, there is participatory budgeting in Evanston right now. 2 times pilot, yes.
What do you think of social media? Surely once people participate in the mini public event, they can simply return to ideological bubbles within social media.
Right, okay.
Okay, so you've got 3 themes: money,
So one is
reality.
what happens to those who did not participate and how money and influence can screw the whole thing, right? And what
we're going to have to go
those who
because we're going to go
participated.
eat and drink. Yeah.
Good. Okay, so with regard to the messy public sphere where the mini public is very nice and once you get into the real world, they will take care of it. If they have any power whatsoever, the people who have power will try to influence them, no question. We are fighting a fight. So the thing is, how is it that you choose some newspapers that you read rather than others? Right? For a reason, right? You don't just trust the first thing you read these days, I'm sure. But these days it's true for anyone because it's so impossible. Okay. So the thing is that why it's so important. To me, the space that they will occupy is the space that traditional outlets, news outlets, used to occupy. Remember that PBS, at least, you were supposed to present the views of everybody, right? It was supposed to be that kind of thing. We don't have that anymore. There's no such thing as social media, right? So, but that's why some of us look at PBS rather than some other thing, right? If people were completely familiar, and they will and can, with what is so special about what Mini Public tells you, that you wanted to know about your fellow citizens, about the quality of the information, they will use that rather than other things. That's the hope, at least. Right now, we have nothing. So if we had it, we will see how many people will buy into that or not. How many people will be influenced by it, right? If they have it in the ballot that they have to vote on, and they trust it, if they trust something else, we are done. So, but we are trying to go up the spiral, which is very hard. So this is the right promise. How much pushback will there be? Well, there always is. We are in a very bad situation. But I still think that people are pissed off of the actual situation right now. Right?
I think that we can all agree on.
Yes.
For sure.
No, but I
So,
mean literally, right? And so with the people who participated, I didn't have the time to talk about it.
Yeah.
My talk was too long anyway. I mean, these people have been polled to eternity. I mean, everybody's polling them after 5 years to see whether they have changed minds or not. Consistently, anyone who has participated, it not only has not polarized, but it has trust in the political system, trust of their fellow citizens. They love it, they vote, they did use not to vote. I mean, that change, and that change is maintained after 5, 10 years. So, but that's the problem, that for these people is amazing. The problem is, yeah, good for them, but what do we do with the rest? I'm more worried about the rest who are not going to participate, because even in Guerrero's model, it will be once in your lifetime that you will be randomly selected in a country like this one, for example, of 300 million, right? It's only going to happen once, right? So, but for those who participate, clearly, because that has been studied again and again and again, I mean, all the time, they really do actually have an amazing political experience. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then would social media throw off this, because people would be getting their own information even in these little conversations?
But those who do not participate, probably that was my first answer, that once they really want to know, right, and they care and they are asked to vote for, because now we don't typically vote for a lot of things, right? And especially, as I was saying, I don't know the hope for those things that are controversial. But what about the things that 90% of the population wants?
Yeah.
Right? For those, I think, no matter how much manipulation, people haven't changed their minds, and they are under manipulation right now. They want it. So chances are, if we could get it into the agenda, it will happen if it's up to us and we vote. So
tomorrow morning, we're going to gather here at 9 o'clock, and we're going to figure out how we can become more participatory, and how we choose the people in these this is a question I don't think we've answered. Who gets in the mini publics, and how do we actually protect democracy? And we have 6 panelists who are going to help us answer that question. But right now, in the great tradition of a symposium, there is food, there is drink, and we want you to go downstairs. But before you go, will you join me in thanking Cristina Lafont for pushing us to think about how to find a way out of this mess?
thank you.
You are optimistic.
Yes.
Thank you, Cristina, and please go have something to drink and eat.